Imagine, if you will, a book bound not in simple leather, but in something far older, something that feels unnervingly like human skin. Its pages, yellowed and brittle with the passage of centuries, are not filled with ordinary ink. The script seems to writhe in the dim candlelight, a dark crimson brown that one might suspect is dried blood. This is the fabled Great Grimoire, a book whispered about in hushed tones by occultists and honestly feared by the Church. It is a legendary object, a key said to unlock the darkest secrets of magic. Its very existence is a rumor, a ghost story told to frighten novices, yet its reputation for power is undeniable, casting a long and chilling shadow over the history of forbidden arts. The danger of such a book lies not just in the spells it contains, but in its very essence. The Great Grimoire, sometimes known as the Red Dragon, was believed to have been written by a figure named Antonio Veneciana del Rabina, supposedly using knowledge transcribed from the writings of King Solomon himself. Its notoriety stems from its explicit instructions on how to summon and make pacts with the highest-ranking demons, including the unholy trinity of Lucifer, Beelzebub, and Astaroth. Merely owning a copy was considered an act of profound heresy, a direct challenge to God's authority. The Church condemned it, and those found possessing it risked excommunication, imprisonment, or even, a fiery death at the stake for consorting with diabolical forces. This grimoire was not a simple collection of folk charms or hedge magic. It was a manual for negotiating with the rulers of the underworld. Its pages outlined the precise methods for calling forth entities that the rest of the world prayed to be protected from. The knowledge within was a double-edged sword of the most perilous kind. On one hand, it promised immense power, wealth, love, vengeance, and dominion over the spiritual and physical realms. On the other, the price for such power was almost always the magician's immortal soul. The book itself was thought to be a cursed object, one that could not be burned, torn, or otherwise destroyed, forever binding its owner to the infernal pacts contained within its sinister pages. The legend of the Great Grimoire grew with every telling, becoming a symbol of the ultimate transgression. It represented the human desire to seize control, to bypass divine will, and command the very forces of creation and destruction. Unlike other magical texts which might focus on planetary angels or elemental spirits, this grimoire aimed for the very top of the Infernal Hierarchy. Its reputation was so fearsome that it was said the book could only be opened by its rightful master, the one who had completed the pact. For anyone else, it was a locked door to madness and damnation, its secrets guarded by the very entities it promised to control, just waiting for a foolish seeker to make a single fatal mistake. Before a magician dared to open a grimoire and recite its incantations, they first had to undergo a period of intense and rigorous preparation. This was not a casual pursuit, but a sacred, all-consuming operation that demanded absolute dedication of body, mind, and spirit. The primary requirement was purity. The operator, as the magician was often called, had to abstain from all worldly pleasures and physical intimacy for a set period, often 40 days, mirroring biblical fasts. This was done to cleanse the self of carnal and material taints, making the soul a purer vessel, less susceptible to the corrupting influence of the spirits they intended to command. This period of denial was a test of willpower, the first of many trials on the path to power. This purification extended beyond simple abstinence. The magician was required to perform daily ablutions or ritual washings while reciting specific prayers or psalms. They would isolate themselves from society, often retreating to a secluded room or a remote location where they would not be disturbed or contaminated by the outside world. Their diet was severely restricted, often consisting of little more than bread and water. Fasting was crucial, as it was believed to weaken the physical body's hold on the spirit, making the operator more sensitive to the ethereal plane. Every action was deliberate, every thought controlled, all aimed at achieving a state of spiritual readiness before confronting the immense powers they sought to master. Timing was another critical element of the preparation, governed by the complex rules of astrology. Magical operations could only be performed at specific times during planetary hours that were aligned with the nature of the work. For example, a ritual for wealth might be conducted during the hour of Jupiter on a Thursday, while a spell for love would be timed to the hour of Venus on a Friday. The magician had to be a competent astrologer, able to calculate these celestial alignments with precision. The moon's phase was also of paramount importance. Great works were typically initiated during a waxing moon, which was believed to amplify the magical energies being drawn down from the heavens and the earth. Finally, the magician had to prepare their soul through constant prayer and meditation. This may seem contradictory for someone intending to summon a demon, but it was a vital part of the process. These prayers were not always directed to God in a conventional sense. Instead, they were solemn invocations, affirmations of the magician's own authority and divine right to command the spirits. They would recite powerful names of God and angels to fortify their own spiritual defenses, creating a shield of sacred power around themselves. This spiritual armor was their only true protection. Without this profound discipline and unwavering faith in their own power, the magician was little more than helpless prey for the very forces they wished to command. No magical operation could be undertaken without a specific and carefully consecrated set of tools. These were not ordinary implements, but extensions of the magician's will, each one imbued with symbolic power and prepared according to strict ancient protocols. Perhaps the most iconic of these was the magic wand, often a rod cut from a hazel or almond tree. According to texts like the Key of Solomon, the branch had to be virgin, meaning it had never borne fruit, and cut from the tree with a single stroke of a new consecrated knife at sunrise on a specific day, such as the day of Mercury. The magician would then carve sacred characters and names upon it before fumigating it with incense and asperging it with holy water, transforming it from a simple piece of wood into a conduit of power. Equally important were the ritual blades. The magician required not one, but several knives, each with a distinct purpose. The white-handled knife was used for fashioning the other instruments of the art, such as carving the wand or trimming quills for writing. Its purpose was creative and preparatory. In stark contrast was the black-handled knife, or the arcane. This was the knife of command and power, used not for cutting physical objects, but for tracing the magic circle on the ground, and for threatening or compelling disobedient spirits. The Great Grimoire also details a sacrificial knife, used in the bloody offerings sometimes required to appease the more demanding infernal entities, a grim tool for a grim purpose. The surface upon which the pacts were written and sigils were drawn was just as significant as the tools used to create them. Grimoires frequently call for the use of virgin parchment, a specially prepared writing material made from the skin of a newborn or stillborn animal, typically a lamb or calf. This material was considered pure and untainted, a blank slate upon which the most powerful magic could be inscribed without interference. The ink itself was often exotic and symbolic, mixed with ingredients like pulverized charcoal, rainwater collected during a thunderstorm, or, in the darkest of rituals, blood drawn from the magician's own body. Each component added its own layer of sympathetic power to the spell. Other essential items included the censer for burning sacred incenses like frankincense and myrrh, which were believed to purify the air and make the space more conducive to spiritual manifestations. A cup or chalice, a sword for added protection and authority within the circle, and robes of a specific color, often white for purity or black for works of maleficence, were also required. Every single object, from the thread used to sew the robes to the water used for asperging, had to be newly made or ritually cleansed. This meticulous preparation ensured that the entire ritual space and everything within it was saturated with magical intent, creating a self-contained universe where the magician's will was absolute law. The grimoires do not present the spirit world as a chaotic mob of phantoms. Instead, they describe a highly organized, almost militaristic structure, a feudal kingdom of darkness with a clear chain of command. At the very apex of this infernal hierarchy stand the three great emperors of hell. The first and most famous is Lucifer, the fallen light-bearer, often depicted as the proud and rebellious emperor. Beneath him is Beelzebub, the prince of devils, whose name translates to Lord of the Flies, a figure associated with corruption and pestilence. The third is the great Duke Astaroth, who appears as a foul angel riding an infernal dragon. These three form a dark triumvirate, ruling over all other spirits and holding the keys to the deepest mysteries of the abyss. Directly serving these emperors are their prime ministers and high-ranking officials. The Grand Grimoire names Lucifuge Rofocale as the Prime Minister of Hell, a figure who holds immense power over all the world's treasures and riches. He is said to be a reluctant servant, one who detests the light and will only appear at night. Others in this upper echelon include Satanachia, the great general who can subjugate women to his will, a Galliarept, another general who can unveil any secret, and Fleurity, the lieutenant general who can perform any labor during the night. Each of these powerful spirits commands a vast number of lesser legions and has a specific domain of influence, from inciting war to revealing hidden knowledge. Below these generals and ministers are countless dukes, marquises, presidents, and knights, each commanding their own legions of subordinate spirits. The Lesser Key of Solomon, specifically its first book, the Ars Goetia, famously lists 72 of these spirits, giving their names, ranks, sigils, and specific abilities. For example, Baal, the first king, can grant the power of invisibility. Agares, a duke, can teach languages and cause earthquakes, and Vasago, a prince of a benevolent nature, can declare things of the past, present, and future, and is sought after for finding lost objects. This detailed taxonomy provided the magician with a veritable catalogue of supernatural assistants to choose from. This structured hierarchy was essential for the practice of ceremonial magic. The magician did not simply shout a demon's name into the void. They followed a precise protocol. To summon a lesser spirit, one might first have to invoke its direct superior, using the higher spirit's authority to compel the lower one to appear and obey. This system of command and control reflected the earthly hierarchies of royalty and government that the magicians were familiar with. It transformed the terrifying and chaotic realm of the demonic into a structured system that could, in theory, be navigated and controlled by a sufficiently knowledgeable and brave operator, who acted as a monarch commanding their spiritual vassals. Central to the most infamous grimoires is the concept of the Pact, a formal binding agreement between the magician and a powerful spirit. This was no mere request. It was a legalistic contract, a supernatural transaction, where the operator offered something of immense value in exchange for the spirit's loyal service. The Grand Grimoire is particularly explicit about this process. It details how the magician, having successfully summoned a high-ranking demon like Lucifuge Rofocale, must present their demands clearly. These demands could range from a vast fortune delivered weekly to the power to bewitch one's enemies. The pact was a negotiation, and the magician had to be firm and unwavering in their terms. The price for such services was almost invariably the magician's own soul. In the most classic form of the diabolical pact, the operator would agree to surrender themselves to the spirit after a set number of years, typically 20. This agreement had to be written down on virgin parchment, often using the magician's own blood as ink to create an unbreakable physical and spiritual link to the contract. The magician would then sign their name, renouncing their baptismal vows and pledging their eternal allegiance to the spirit and its emperor. This was the ultimate act of transgression, a conscious and deliberate choice to trade eternal salvation for temporary earthly power, a bargain from which there was believed to be no escape. The risks involved in making such a pact were immense and went far beyond the eventual damnation of the soul. The spirits themselves were depicted as treacherous and cunning. They would test the magician's resolve at every turn, attempting to trick them, frighten them out of the protective circle, or find a loophole in the contract. A moment of fear or a lapse in concentration could prove fatal, allowing the spirit to break free of the magician's control and attack them, dragging them away physically and spiritually. Even if the pact was successfully concluded, the magician lived on borrowed time, forever marked by their infernal allegiance and haunted by the looming deadline when the debt would come due. Furthermore, the pact itself was a source of constant danger. The magician had to carry the written contract with them at all times, as it was their proof of the agreement and the source of their power over the spirit. If this parchment were to be lost or destroyed, the bargain might be voided, and the spirit would be free to exact a terrible revenge. Living with such a secret, constantly looking over one's shoulder and dreading the inevitable end, was a heavy psychological burden. The wealth and power gained through the pact often came with a heavy dose of paranoia and misery, turning the magician's life into a gilded cage from which the only exit led directly to hell. The allure of the grimoires was not just their dark reputation, but the incredible range of practical abilities they promised to bestow upon the successful practitioner. These were not abstract philosophical treatises. They were instruction manuals for achieving tangible results in the real world. One of the most common promises was the discovery of hidden treasure. Spells and rituals were provided to compel spirits to reveal the location of buried gold, sunken pirate chests, and lost fortunes. Spirits like Lucifuge Rofocale or the Goetic King Bile were said to have dominion over the earth's riches, and a magician who could command them could theoretically become wealthier than any king through supernatural means. Another highly sought-after power was that of invisibility. Numerous grimoires, including the Key of Solomon, contain detailed instructions for creating rings, stones, or ointments that would render the user unseen by mortal eyes. This ability held obvious appeal, offering the ultimate freedom to move undetected, to spy on enemies, or to commit acts without fear of being caught. The methods often involved complex consecrations and the inscription of magical characters on a specific object, which when worn or activated with the correct incantation would bend light and perception around the magician, cloaking them in a shroud of magical secrecy. It was a power that fulfilled a deep-seated human fantasy of freedom from observation. The promised powers could also be deeply personal and sometimes bizarre. There were spells to win the love of any person desired, compelling them to fall madly in love with the magician against their will. There were also curses to bring ruin, sickness, and misfortune upon one's enemies. The grimoires offered the power of flight, the ability to understand the languages of animals, the skill to transmute metals, and the knowledge of past and future events. Some spells were strangely specific, such as a charm from the Grimorium Verum for making 3 ladies appear in one's room after supper to assist the magician, or another to prevent a dog from barking. This mix of the profound and the peculiar made the grimoires a treasure trove of forbidden possibilities. Ultimately, these texts offered a form of ultimate control over one's life and environment. In a world governed by fate, disease, and the whims of powerful rulers, magic promised a way to seize the reins of destiny. If you were poor, the grimoires offered wealth. If you were weak, they offered strength and vengeance. If you were lonely, they offered companionship, albeit coerced. This promise of empowerment, of being able to bend reality to one's will, was the central and most potent secret the grimoires held. They presented a world where nothing was impossible for the individual who had the courage, knowledge, and willingness to pay the often terrible price. While grimoires like the Grand Grimoire are infamous for their diabolical pacts and malevolent spells, it is a mistake to assume all such texts were dedicated to darkness. The world of ceremonial magic was a spectrum, and for every book focused on commanding demons, there was another aimed at communing with angels and benevolent spirits. These white magic grimoires sought not earthly power or wealth, but divine wisdom, spiritual enlightenment, and a deeper understanding of God's creation. They represented the other side of the coin, where the goal was not to enslave spirits for personal gain, but to learn from them as divine messengers and teachers of a higher truth. A prime example of this more positive tradition is the Grimoire of Turiel. This text provides instructions for summoning the eponymous spirit, Turiel, who is described not as a demon to be threatened, but as a benevolent teacher. The purpose of the ritual is to gain knowledge in a specific art or science. The magician seeks wisdom, not power over others. Similarly, the works of Dr. John Dee and his scryer Edward Kelly, documented in their spiritual diaries, detail their attempts to communicate with angels to learn the celestial language of creation. Their goal was the restoration of true religion and science, a holy mission they believed was guided by God, even though their methods of scrying and angelic invocation were viewed with suspicion. This contrast highlights the fundamental duality within the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. The techniques were often remarkably similar: the magic circle, the consecrated tools, the timed rituals, and the use of incantations to call forth a spiritual entity. However, the intent behind the operation was entirely different. One path led downwards towards pacts with infernal ministers for control over the material world, a path of domination and ultimate self-destruction. The other path led upwards towards communion with celestial beings for spiritual growth and intellectual illumination, a path of supplication and self-improvement that sought to elevate the human spirit rather than enslave it. In the end, the grimoires, whether light or dark, were viewed by their practitioners not as a collection of superstitious nonsense, but as a profound science. It was a science of the unseen world, with its own laws, procedures, and dangers. To study it required immense bravery, discipline, and a willingness to step beyond the accepted boundaries of religion and society. The appeal of this knowledge is timeless, representing humanity's unquenchable thirst to understand the mysteries of the universe and its own place within it. For those who dared to walk this path, the grimoires were a perilous key, one that could unlock the gates of either heaven or hell, offering either divine wisdom or eternal damnation. The choice and the responsibility lay entirely with the magician.